Hey everyone, it's Jen again. I first want to apologize for not making a video last week. Part of it was that I was feeling sick, and part of it was that I just didn't really feel like I had much to say at the time. I was going through a phase that I guess I would call being numb, where my indignation at the state of the world, at the state of humanity, society, it just gets me down sometimes to the point where I just feel sad mad, for lack of better words. And when I'm in that state of feeling sad mad, I just get really salty, and I kind of just I start immersing myself in a lot of stories, because I'm trying to kind of reconnect with humanity. And usually when I am feeling very disillusioned with humanity as a whole, the way that I cope with that, or I have found to be useful, is instead of looking at the broader systems of inequity, injustice, disparity, exploitation, all these things, it helps me to focus on individuals and to listen to individual stories, because that is probably the most infuriating thing, but the saving grace of, I guess, my outlook on life and society is that there's so much that, as a whole, harm is in suffering, unnecessary harm and suffering that persists, that is upheld by humans as a whole. But when I look at humans individually, I still see this kind of shared experience that I can empathize with, that I feel connected to, that I feel there's shared experiences and desires and hopes and dreams and feelings. And it's just mind-blowing to me sometimes how much we have in common on a fundamental level, and how much we're just like crabs in a bucket pulling each other down, instead of working together to make a better world and life for ourselves and our children and our planet. I've been doing a lot of thinking also about just retro games. I think I was most into gaming when I was in middle school, and around that time was when the 16-bit systems were popular, and that's when I really discovered like JRPGs for the first time. And I was looking back on some of my favorite JRPGs at the time, and certainly I enjoyed Final Fantasy 2 or 4, Final Fantasy 6, Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana, the games that were praised as being the pinnacle of that era of JRPGs at the time. And I really don't have any critiques to say about, like, anything that was wrong with them. I enjoyed them immensely at the time. But I don't really think about them now, and I don't know if that's because they've been looked to as the I guess, pinnacle of that type of game during that time, that they've been iterated quite a bit since then. And a lot of those enduring properties kind of reinvent the wheel over and over again, and they might add little incremental improvements, but I would say at the core, not too much has changed, in my opinion. Maybe if you compare the very most recent, of the franchise to back then, yeah, it's going to seem like there's been a lot of changes in like 20 years or something, but not so much game to game. I think that they've stayed relatively safe. They had a good formula going for them, and then they continued to work from there, and which is very good business sense from a game development point of view. If I was trying to have a successful business venture, then I think most experienced people in the industry would say, yeah, you don't want to stray too far from what people are familiar with. You can innovate a certain amount, but you can't innovate too much, because if people are not, if it's too alien, if it's too different, people are going to meet that with resistance. They're not going to get it. They're going to say, I don't like that, or I don't understand that. And especially nowadays where, back in the 16-bit era of gaming, the amount of, especially RPGs coming out at the time, were few and far between. So if you, let's say, were, I'm going to pick Paladin's Quest, because that was one that I had a hard time getting into at first. Let's say you paid $60 for Paladin's Quest. You're not going to, at that time, be able to just find another RPG to play. If you're like, oh, this is too grindy, this is too weird, this is too annoying, or whatever it is, you're going to have to be waiting a long time for the next game to come out. So you might just put up with it, and eventually it might start to grow on you, as it did with me. In hindsight, a lot of the games that had very big and glaring flaws, I guess you could say, had very annoying and sometimes even like, I don't know, sadistic game mechanics in them, where you're kind of like, what was the programmer doing here? Are they trying to torture their audience? A few dungeons in Phantasy Star 2 come to mind, where I can just remember being on my friend's bed, because her Genesis was upstairs, her Super Nintendo was downstairs. I remember being like playing her Genesis and just like going bananas on some of these dungeons. Like, what the heck is going on here? This is so frustrating. So I don't know if what stands out to me, this many decades later, is that those points of pain were so impressionable, that it made the good points of the game feel like a relief. If there's something that feels like a stronger sense of accomplishment when you have to basically endure something that feels like it's torturing you at the time, as opposed to having like a smooth experience. I don't know what that factor is exactly. So I was spending a lot of time kind of ruminating over this. Why when I'm looking back at these 16-bit games, am I more interested in looking at Paladin's Quest, at looking at Phantasy Star 2, at looking at Seventh Saga? Why am I, even Draken, why am I looking up gameplay footage of Draken? The game that just puzzled me to death, literally, where I was just wandering around, dying every other encounter, it felt like, and having absolutely no clue what the heck I was supposed to do. What was it about these games that has me more interested in looking at them than going back to like Chrono Trigger or Secret of Mana? And I think what I decided upon was that I am just more interested in things that have flaws in them. And I'm not talking about some just half-baked thing thrown together, on a whim that was just like, slapped together with Band-Aids and just like carelessly, thrown out there for a quick buck. I'm not talking about those kind of flawed pieces of art. I guess I'm talking more about things that you can tell were crafted with intention and care and took a certain amount of risks and became and had obvious glaring flaws as a result. But they're interesting because there's something there under all of its warts that feels authentic. And I have a hard time even really saying like how you could identify what that thing is, but I just feel like you know it when you see it. And maybe that's kind of like where these discussions of AI generation kind of come from, where it's like I feel like the difference between like human flawed artwork and like the flaws that come up with generated content are different, because I just feel a sense of intention behind the human artists despite their flaws, where the generated content, it feels more just like an arbitrary hiccup of data. So the older that I get and the more, I guess, content that I've consumed in my lifetime, I start to appreciate the things that are more of that kind of like human flaw for the risks that it takes, for that kind of like bullheadedness that I was talking about earlier. And maybe that just sounds like a justification for my own flawed work going forward. But anyways, I don't know why I'm going off on these on this particular tangent where I was going with that. But it kind of struck me how much, when I was growing up, that people would kind of revere innovators, I guess you could say, as being like these brilliant people who came up with these new ideas, these new systems, these new styles, these new genres. How they were like these brilliant people, these visionaries that are like one in a million. And I don't take away from the idea that these people have good ideas and that that I understand that not everybody is creative. But I guess what I kind of came to the conclusion was that maybe more so than being brilliant, because I don't like the idea of attributing greatness to some kind of inborn, genetically determined like parameter, like intelligence is often attributed to. Like, I don't know how much of that is just like eugenics nonsense, or like I haven't done much studies to like how much genetic and environmental factors affect somebody's intelligence. I think both things would have an impact, but I think when people in general talk about people being smart, at least when I was sometimes called smart when I was a kid because I could, excel in the school system the way it's set up. I feel like a lot of times it was treated the same way. A lot of times people talk about artists or artistic skill, as a lot of times people would attribute that to being some kind of like just inborn, innate property, that you're born with. Like, oh, you were born creative, or you were born smart, or you were born artistic, or you were born, to be this way. But honestly, I think what it is more so, and this might be a born trait too, I don't know. Some people might argue. But I think what is more than being any of those things, I feel like innovation is about bravery. Maybe I'm overly optimistic, but I feel like every human being has the potential to be creative and to have interesting, explorative, curious ideas if given the right environment and given the right encouragement and societal reward for that. But instead, society as a whole really punishes people who do not conform. And I know that I know that people just kind of like, yeah. How you're already, most people are thinking of like the bully, the high school scenario of like the cool kids and the not cool kids. I'm not talking about that type of like overly performative, like conformity. I'm talking about like conformity in ways that we don't even realize that we're compromising because we've been so conditioned, because it's so hardwired into us. And maybe I just saw those more when I finally became a parent, because there's so many like cultural norms that the more I started thinking about it, it absolutely made no sense from a biological standpoint. Like a lot of the norms around breastfeeding, co-sleeping, so much of these things were cultural norms that were like being kind of pseudo-explained by whatever studies, like kind of manipulated data. But like if you've actually thought about like where we come from as a species and how little our biology has changed from an evolutionary standpoint in the last so many thousands of years, how much of that change is culturally driven rather than biologically driven. There's so much weird stuff that we shame ourselves into doing, and then we justify it as being our own choice because it's easier to do that than to admit that most of us are not that brave. I think that there's even the idea of bravery is kind of like this weird cultural skew that you have to be like, I don't know, throwing yourself at villains or something, as if the most villainous people on the earth are people who are just like mugging people, The most villainous people on this earth are the ones who are causing pain and suffering to disproportionate amounts of people and to the planet. And standing up to those people would not be like standing up to an individual. It'd be standing up to entire systems that most of us couldn't even fathom where to start. truly standing up to. Because we're not that brave. And I put myself in there too. And I think when you think about like the type of advice that's given on the internet for like fellow creatives to follow XYZ prescriptions because you don't want to waste your time making a game that nobody's going to play or nobody's going to like. Or I think of how we are conditioned as artists to conform and prop up the capitalist systems, even though art by its nature is deconstructing, reconstructing, and challenging to a lot of societal norms, which is why it tends to not, a lot of creatives tend not to be conservatives. But we still conform in a lot of ways to the systems that are in place through little shame tactics like, what if you're too self-indulgent? What if you're unappealing and unapologetic about it? That's so cringe. And how dare you? As if I'm causing any harm, or you would be causing any harm by being so. If that was like the worst thing that you were doing on this existence on this planet, was being self-indulgent and cringe. But think of how much we stifle ourselves with that type of mentality. I also want to go back for a moment and clarify one of the things that I said about all people, and I guess I should say most people. Whenever I talk about anything in absolute terms, I'm probably not talking about 100% of any one thing. I'm probably talking in general terms, and I should probably work on trying to use the correct words and language to convey those ideas and the nuance of that. There is a cut here because I have been struggling a little bit with how to articulate my thoughts as I've been kind of sitting with myself for the last couple weeks, just kind of pondering these things. I go through these weird I don't know what to say. I have this weird polarity, I feel like, with myself, that most people who know me in real life think of me as somebody who has good communication skills. I think I'm a fairly good listener, and I will often ask follow-up questions and repeat what I hear in order to try to make sure that I am understanding, or at least understanding to the best of my ability, what somebody's trying to communicate. And I spend a lot of time thinking about things, generally speaking, before I start having conversations about them. So when I do converse about things, I can sound like I'm pretty articulate with my communication skills, but actually I think it's a little bit of an illusion that I've maybe I struggle more than what most people would guess. And yeah, this video is one of those instances where even after spending a lot of time in my thoughts and making a couple different cuts of the video, I'm still kind of all over the place with where I'm trying to address this topic, which is probably a sign that I have not quite figured out how I feel about it. So if you have some thoughts that you'd like to add to the discussion, please do so, because I don't know if I'll still feel what I'm saying in this video in another week. Maybe I'll draw a different conclusion after pondering it for a bit more, because I think talking about it in this video has made me realize that I'm not quite as certain. I'm still exploring this idea and trying to settle in how I feel about it. But I do think there's something at the core of what I'm trying to say that I've just really been interested in flaws a lot more in creative expression than I have been in the past, and this has been going on for a while now, so I do think there is something there that particularly sparks my interest. But I don't want to make it sound like it's like all flaws are like equally fascinating, because again, the more intentionality, the more authenticity, and the more effort and skill that was a part of that whole creative process is going to be tangible, as opposed to just making errors and flaws due to inexperience, or like this whole video, just not having a good focus, just being kind of uncertain and meandering around. Like, those types of flaws are not going to come across as strongly as somebody who is taking a risk. And so I think there's certain things that I think you could, flaws that are somewhat debatable, and flaws that are also perceived differently as time goes on. And sometimes it works in reverse, where sometimes things that were considered good and acceptable and desirable will then be seen as flaws later on as society, adapts and changes to a different standard. So I just wanted to try to clarify some of my thoughts on this matter, but I should probably stop now because this video is getting really long. And I just hope that you're doing well and that you're having a good start to your year. If you're not, it's not too late to turn it around. We've still got a long way to go. So please take care of yourself, and if you're working on anything, I hope that you're remembering to enjoy the process, because life is too short and there's a lot of constraints. Hopefully your creative life is not one of those places. All right, take care. Bye-bye.